Hey there, I'm Camp Wright. I'm here to talk with you about the invisible pink unicorn and the church behind it. So basically, the church was created in 1990 by an online atheist forum. It was based off the Russell's teapot analogy, which basically says there's a teapot floating between here and Mars, but you can't prove it. You just gotta have the belief that it's there, and you can get enough people to believe in that, even though it may or may not be there. And so it formed into a full religion by 1994/1995 by a group of college students in England, University of Cambridge, I think. And so it fully founded into a religion by the early 2000s, with a few churches here and there in California, mostly in California. Are you surprised? So there weren't, big names with the founders, but what I could find was on the Prophet April and Rich Daniel, which we'll get into him later. So they have a whole bunch of beliefs. Their biggest beliefs in creation are basically the same as the Bible's. There's a creation in 7 days, same order, starting with the creation of heaven and earth and ending with a Sabbath. So, not too many differences. There's a few ones. It's one pink unicorn, that's just saying something. Which created many more pink unicorns. And that also Eden was a beach. It was created as a beach surrounded by the sea of knowledge. And also man and woman were created for the IPU's comforts and company, because the IPU could die and so could the human. But the humans, the man and woman, were shielded basically from suffering and death before their own death. Woman was created from man's brain instead of his rib, which, I guess since it was created by a woman, it was probably trying to make us look stupider. The only suffering that the man and woman felt were during the woman's cycle of pinkness, which I'll let you interpret that, which was the only suffering man and woman felt on the beach once every month. So that's pretty cool. Man and woman were only ordered to eat from the trees and of the plants, but not any of the animals. And so next, sin and evil, of course, enters the world. It was kind of in the world. The world was created with sin and evil, or at least in this religion. And but the man and woman were shielded from it by the IPU, just to keep the IPU happy. But basically, the woman kills a dolphin. She's pretty brutal. But she was tempted by a purple oyster in the Sea of Knowledge outside of Eden, which told her if she slit the porpoise's throat, she would know, and she would not have that suffering or pain every month. But it's quite the contradictory. Basically, the woman kills the porpoise, and then they both eat of it after cooking it. And then the IPU finds them and then makes them suffer. So she says to all the beasts, since you have done this, they will know suffering and no pain. And to the oyster, she said that he will be the bottom dweller of the ocean and feed off the feces of other animals, and their flesh will be eaten by man only in greed and not for sustenance. And to the woman, she said, you basically have pain during childbirth, which kind of sucks, and you'll have suffering through their lives, through your children's life. And to both of them, they will basically be hungry and hunger for animals. And also they'll know suffering, they'll know pain, and they'll know death. But there's a lot in here about the nature of God, but not a lot about the nature of man. So mostly the IPU appeared to only virgin women before the internet, mostly because its sensitivity to STDs. I don't know what kind of religion would make its God's only weakness to be chlamydia, but that's pretty cool. Its names include the one, true one, IPU, her pinkness, her horniness, our galloping goddess, and she whose hooves are never shod. I don't know what that means. The IPU is known for stealing socks and making laundry loads pink. So next time you pull out a pink load, just know the IPU blessed you. There's 4 main principles to the IPU's existence, which is invisibility, pinkness, and also, no matter how it may seem to our puny human intellects, there's no contradiction between her invisibility and her pinkness. The more self-contradictory she becomes, the more she exists. So even if there was a contradiction between her invisibility and her pinkness, it would prove basically beyond a reasonable doubt that she does exist. Next, we have the nature of man. So there wasn't a lot about the relationship between the two, mostly that man is greatly inferior and mostly hated by the IPU. But, I mean, as you'd think, it loves its followers more than, unbelievers. And it has a gender bias, so that's cool. Women are loved more by the IPU than men. But both man and woman were created to understand her and the world she created. So that's pretty cool. Next is the belief of salvation. So there are multiple hells. The main hell is a giant dung pile where minions bite at your kneecaps. There are like 800 hells, I think, or millions and more, I don't know. But most of them don't even make sense. The only salvation is to believe in the IPU and to curse the purple oyster of doom, the same one that tempted the woman in the beach of Eden. Speaking of Eden, heaven is just like Eden, a soft, warm beach with crystal water surrounding it, which sounds great. But one day, the purple oyster of doom will be redeemed, and a great feast like none other will happen in heaven, which is pretty awesome. There are many common practices with this religion. One of them is to consider Mitt Romney a unicorn and to pray to him. They could also set up shrines in their laundry room, also known as her holy place, eating ham and pineapple pizza, and shunning pepperoni and mushroom pizza. They hate that for a reason. To follow her commandments, which there are 4 easy commandments. Thou shalt not use spurs. Thou shalt not be made into meat products and sold to schools for profit. Thou shalt not lead us to water, for we will not be made to drink. And thou shalt not worship any other color except divine pink. They also practice being vegnotic, which is only eating family farm-raised animals or free-range animals, but being mostly vegetarian. There's also tattoos of the IPU on people, which is really stupid. And lastly, they listen to the words of their many, many prophets and priests, including High Priest Rich Daniels, who is a llama, the holy zebra, which there are a lot of other holy animals, the prophet April, and AX Lias. There's a lot more prophets, but a lot of them are really, like one and done, while these guys are like, a lot of scriptures are written about them. And speaking of scriptures, many of their scriptures are just like the Bible, where they have, books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Hosea, Judges, Ruth, 1 through 4 Kings, 1st and 2nd Paraphilion, 1st and 2nd Esdras, then Tobias, Judith, Esther, Job, Slams, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Canticle of Canticles. But most of the scriptures were lost in the burning of the library in the Temple of Pinkness in Glimmervoid, California. They're starting to rewrite their scriptures, though, and so there are many revisions to these scriptures, but the main one is the New Standard Reformed Vegnatic revision. So, as I said, differences between this and Christianity. The big ones, though, is the IPU is more chill about sin. It says, go off, do your own thing, but only, worship me instead of other gods and worship the color pink. But also, God loves all, while the IPU only loves its followers, as I said earlier, and is also biased between genders, which that's really messed up. And so basically, this religion was made to mock Christianity, but drew most of its beliefs from Christianity. So, I mean, that's cool. I'm now a firm believer in the IPU, following every word of its church and its scriptures that burned down in a church in California. So, thank you for listening to my testimony, and sweet.